Welcome to this week's On the Fly podcast. I'm your host, Gene DeFilippo, and our guest this week is the very successful Director of Athletics at the University of Houston, Chris Pezman. Welcome to the show, Pez.
Thanks, Gene. Pleasure to be here with you, and looking forward to a great conversation for the next 45 minutes to an hour.
Let's start with the University of Houston, because a lot of our young listeners out there don't understand what a great history and tradition you have at Houston. I remember when Guy Lewis was the coach there, and you went to 5 Final Fours with Bill Yeoman as your football coach. You went to many, many bowl games. And I was in high school, and I think, in my opinion, 2 of the most important basketball games ever played was one with the University of Kentucky, I believe it was 66, against Texas Western. And on January 20th of 68, the game of the century, the Houston Cougars versus the UCLA Bruins. Would you agree to that?
Absolutely. It predates me a bit, but growing up here in the city of Houston, I moved here in high school. That would have been like 83, 84. And that was, the Phi Slamma Jamma runs, and also the runs with Coach Yeoman. The history of this program, of this department, is just, it's so rich. Again, you mentioned Coach Lewis and the 5 Final Fours. The thing that I think doesn't get talked enough about Coach Lewis and Coach Yeoman was also their integration at that time of diverse players into the programs, because that wasn't something that was happening. I mean, you think about the path that Elvin Hayes blazed here at the University of Houston, and then Coach Yeoman with the players he brought in. Those are things that I don't think it talked about enough, because they were so in front of what was acceptable at that time in our country, and it was a door that had to be open, and then so quickly you saw other schools follow that. But that to me is something that we need to talk more about, but also just the competitive success in the department. I mean, Dave Williams golf, 16 national championships. I mean, it just the depth of success here is so great, particularly with the coaches. And I'll tell you a funny story. It was when I played here 88 through 92, and I got invited to like a Rotary Club event, and Coach Lewis was there, and he had been retired for probably about, I don't know, 6, 8, 10 years at that point. And he actually said, "Hey, I really like the way you play." And it was the best compliment I ever got. I don't know if he knew who I was, but it was really kind of him to say. And I still tell everybody that to this day. So what they mean to us here at the university, we're always trying to find ways to make sure that we continue to bring their names forward and keep them in the spotlight. Our basketball training facility is named after Coach Lewis. Our indoor track and field facility is named after Coach Yeoman. Ironic, because it used to actually be our indoor football practice facility, but we converted it. But the amount of talent that came through the University of Houston over those decades, and the success they had, and how that helped shape us for today, is something that I don't take for granted at all. And I'm very fortunate to be here, because we stand on their shoulders. They helped put us in this position.
You're being modest, but you were a very, very good linebacker at the University of Houston, and played on some very good teams. So I remember you. Let's talk about your move to the Big 12. First of all, the significance of moving to a Power 5 conference, but also what it's going to take for Houston, be it facility-wise, selling tickets, fundraising, all the things that go with the move to the Big 12.
Yeah. When I say it touches everything, it literally touches every aspect of our operation within athletics, and significantly across campus. Where to start? Let's just start with facilities. This goes back to when we were playing the Astrodome, and Chet Gladchuk was the athletic director, and we moved back onto campus. and we were playing an old Robertson Stadium, which was a track facility, and it was an old WPA project that had nothing done to it. It literally sat like 18,000 seats maybe, and it had a 15-foot cyclone fence around with barbed wire around the top, and we played UCLA in that stadium. And it blows my mind that we did that, looking back on that today. But it had to be, we had to do something dramatic to have a catalyst to start moving ourselves forward. So we moved camp football back onto campus, which really started a process for us. It took a long time, about another 20 years or 15 years to get the stadium built. But fortunately, about 12 years ago, we built TDUC Stadium, and that started galvanizing our alumni base with, understanding that we were committed to sports here at a high level. We always were, but we never were able to manifest that in a physical way to prove that we were doing that. And by building facilities, it helped, frankly, put a tent pole on the ground and say, okay, this is where we're starting. We're building from here. And quickly over the next, 5 years, we built almost $300 million in construction. We built the Guy V. Lewis practice facility for basketball. We remodeled Fertitta Center, which in my opinion is one of the great basketball venues in our country. Indoor practice facility for football, a baseball operations center, and we modified and put an indoor track into our indoor football facility that I mentioned. All these things that have helped set the stage for us today, because we had to invest like that to prove that we were serious about our commitment to athletics to be able to have a chance to compete at that next level. And as you think about graduating from G5 to P5, and I know their names, but there are operating mindsets that go around that and commitments that go around that. Quickly, we realized that we were going to have to do something very similar for a football program that we'd done for basketball with the standalone training facility. And so now, we are waiting on board approval, but fully expect it. We're going to build a $140 million football operations center that will house football's everyday needs, just like basketball has. So that's the first step now as we start this immediate transition into the Big 12. Then you pivot, and I'm not trying to gloss over these other things because I could talk about an hour about facilities, but budgets. We're sitting here and we're transitioning to Big 12, and we feel very healthy about where we are from a budget standpoint today, but we also know that we have to grow our budget by about a good 25 to 30% in the next 2 years. And so, our revenues are going at a 45-degree angle, but our expenses are going at a 90-degree angle, and trying to reconcile those two paths is something that we're spending quite a bit of time on. We've been, frankly, for the last 3 months, doing a deep dive into a 5-year look ahead of our pro forma. So then we could understand where we have resources that we can reinvest into our programs. And again, this is operating.
Go over that 5-part plan, because you mentioned that to me earlier, and I think that everybody listening out there will be very interested in your plan.
Yeah, so I apologize if I said 5-part, I meant 5-year plan, but it probably feels like 5 parts, and it's really like 100. But so what we're looking at right now is we started looking ahead. We know what our graduated revenue distribution will be from the Big 12, year 1, year 2, and year 3 is a full share. So we're able to model that, and then also anticipate what that growth should be, going out 5 years. But then also for us, we focus principally on the revenues on the front end, because we knew generally we could get our hands around that with the projected growth of our department. We're anticipating selling 5,000 new season tickets in football alone this next year. What's really exciting is since the time we announced the schedule about a week and a half ago to today, we've gotten almost 1,000 new season ticket deposits. So those are multiples. We had season ticket renewals with 173 unique renewals within that. And then our waiting list for premium seating went from, I think it was about 80 to over 650 people that are waiting for premium seating. That's all sold out. That's including 10 new suites and 10 new party decks that we're making available for this year. And then as we look ahead with our facilities, we're going to end up adding about 750 new premium seats and 14 new I'm speaking too fast, I apologize. 750 new premium seats and 14 new suites in the new football facility that'll help service that stadium and give us a revenue that goes against the debt service of that facility. I mean, I could keep going. I don't know if you want me. I can. I don't want to bore you too much.
You're not boring us at all. Talk to us about the increase in season in season tickets. I think you're going up maybe 12 or 13% with your season tickets, and yet they're selling great.
Yeah, so it's actually it's interesting, Gene. So one of the things that's unique for our transition is, we've had an even conference schedule in the American, and basically we've had 6 home games for the last 10 years. This next year in the Big 12, we'll have 7, with the benefit of Texas being one of those 7 home games for us. So we're flatlining. We're saying, if it was a 6-game season, it would be just under a 15% increase with that Texas game layered in, because next year we'll go from 7 to 6 home games in year 2 of the Big 12. So we were trying to figure out a way to stabilize and make our growth consistent instead of having spikes. The Texas game is including that into our package at 7 games. It's a 30% lift. And frankly, some people are challenged by that price increase, particularly given what's going on in our economy. But by and large, everybody understands the strength of that home schedule that we have, which is everything we could hope for. And then obviously the benefit of the Texas game and that 7th home game allowed us to basically have the coverage of that lift in pricing. And no one's batting an eye. Everybody understands the cost of doing business as we make this transition. There are times that conversation is a little bit longer, explaining that to donors or season ticket holders. But by and large, everybody understands what we need to do to give ourselves a chance to be competitively successful when we make the transition. Which goes to the next point of this 5-year look ahead. By and large, we're not going to be apples to apples yet with the peers that we'll be competing against from a budget standpoint. So that's what we've been really spending most of our time on, is how do we give our programs the resources they need to be able to compete against the teams we're competing against. We're probably about 20 to 30% light across the board in operating budgets. And so as we're sitting here and making decisions, funding Alston, which for us would be about a $2.5 million bogey, to funding coaching salaries or coaching increases to budget increases. Those are conversations that we'll be having with our coaches over the next 30 days to say, okay, here's our buckets, and this is how we see attacking it. And we want your input and your feedback as we make those decisions. But by and large, it's investing in our programs, investing in our student athletes, investing in our revenue producing efforts. And then everything else, frankly, gets ranked after that. And it's, that list is probably about 100 items long of things that we know we need to fund as soon as possible. But we just have to prioritize each of those items as they come up. And some of them vary by program. Some of them vary by need, student athlete need versus operational need versus administrative needs. And we focus, again, principally on revenue generation and student athlete health and welfare. And then after that, operation budgets. And then after that, salaries, because we just can't eat that whole elephant at once. We got to do it in bites.
Right. What an interesting football schedule this year. You open against TCU at home, which is great. You have Texas at home, but you're playing 10 games in the state of Texas. Has that ever happened before?
Not that I'm aware of, and I'm really excited about it. We only get on a plane 3 times, and one of those is going to Lubbock. As far as I know, we haven't had the benefit of a schedule like this in a long, long time. And the strength again of the home schedule for us with Oklahoma State here, Cincinnati, West Virginia. I mean, obviously everybody's talking about TCU and Texas, but shoot, we opened the season at home with UTSA, and they've got a great program and they've got a great coach, and we're not taking that for granted at all.
No.
We better be buckled up.
Yeah, and that league is really, really tough with Baylor.
Oh yeah,
Texas Tech. You got a great league.
Yeah, what I think gets lost in a lot of the realignment, Gene, and this is what I'm so excited about because of our proximity, is the ability for our fans to get in a car, go to Waco, go to Fort Worth, and you can go up and go back. And that's what I grew up with the old Southwest Conference. And to me, that's what it's supposed to be. And I understand the economics dictate that we have to look broader, but for us, this niche that we've been able to fall into and develop is so unique and so special. And I'm really looking forward to the next few years as our fans get used to doing this again. And it's going to be a lot of fun. Those rivalries, those traditional rivalries that we grew up with,
right,
are going to be so much fun. The banter that's going to go back and forth in the offices and in the stadiums and the arenas is going to be a lot of fun.
Back to the future, as they say.
Amen. Yes, sir.
Let's talk a little bit about your movement to the Big 12 and what was involved. how quickly did it go? Um, I know you've been preparing for it for a long time, but tell us some of the inside story of your moving to the Big 12 because people will be really interested in hearing that.
Sure. We started, frankly, when I got here, that was one of the prime directives from our board and our administration was to, keep our eyes on the horizon, be prepared for conference realignment. And, you know, economically, it's something that, where we had invested, it was something that we were anticipating and hope would manifest itself. And, you know, fortunately it did. But there was a lot of work that went in behind the scenes for a long, long time to be able to put ourselves in that position. And, one message I would tell people is you think about if you're wanting to make these transitions or put your institution or programs in that position is the investment starts years in advance. It's nothing that you can just flip a switch and think, okay, hey, we want to do this transition into this league. It doesn't happen like that. It's literally, it started when we said we're building TDECU Stadium. I mean, that was 10 years in advance. But when I got here, now it's been 5 years, we had put together, frankly, what looked like a political campaign. We did a deep dive into our market, trying to understand what we could deliver within Harris County, the city of Houston, and the state of Texas, and did a really deep dive of, it was by zip code with alumni demographics, populations, education, average income, things like that. So when we were able to have conversations or we're preparing ourselves to have conversations, whether it was, aspirational peers, conference commissioners, whoever it is, TV execs, we were able to impart that information along the way. Now, we all know they're getting pounded with a lot of information like that. So we tried to make it a really short and concise statement of who we are and what we're doing here, and tried to have other people that would help maybe speak to our benefit or on our behalf without really recognizing that they were doing it. Industry insiders, people that are maybe not directly affiliated with those transitions that could help advocate for you without necessarily advocating for you. So we were able to kind of post people up all around the process to kind of help tell our story. But by and large, it really started a couple of years in advance. You could kind of read the tea leaves. You knew something was going to happen at some point, whether it was out west or in the central US, that
Right.
there was going to be some movement. And frankly, when I heard UT and OU, that announcement was coming, I heard probably about 2 weeks in advance there was a possibility of it. And I'd had some conversations with our board chair and our president, like, just reading the tea leaves, this is what I'm hearing is coming. And they kind of chuckled. And, I was like, oh, that'll never happen. And I'll be damned. It was not even a week later or 10 days later, you're getting this news and, I'm getting feedback. How did you know? And it wasn't anything, sentient or anything like that. It just kind of happened. You just were able to anticipate what was happening in the market a little bit. So with that movement, with UT and OU departing, it created a vacuum that I knew was our opportunity, and it was going to be, frankly, our next, probably last best chance to have an opportunity. And we
Right.
started having conversations with everybody, reaching out to, again, the presidents of several leagues, ADs. And what's really unique about it, and this is one thing I'll say, is it's a very lonely time because you don't necessarily know who you can talk to, who you can genuinely trust, who's sharing accurate information, and what you can share without jeopardizing your own position. And it's not that you don't want to be a good colleague or a good partner or a good friend or ally in this. It's just everybody's got their own interests. And so you get put in this position where you're kind of looking over your shoulder the whole time. And there's conversations that are happening, frankly, with people that maybe you aren't represented with, and you're trying to get to them to be able to impart your story without just pounding everybody with 10 phone calls a day. And I think we struck a pretty good balance with that, but it's,
But Pez, it is a
yeah,
lonely time. And I remember at Boston College when we left the Big East and went to the Atlantic Coast Conference. Um, you're getting some of your fans don't like the move, other fans do. You don't know. You want to present yourself in a real good way, but you're not sure who you can trust and who you can't. And it's a lonely time for the president and the athletic director. It really is. I'm glad to hear you tell people that.
yeah, honestly, if there's one thing I can say is be comfortable being uncomfortable, because you're stuck. It's almost like a coaching search to an extent, in the same sense where you got to kind of be tight with your information because you don't want it leaking. But at the same time, you got to tell your story and be reaching out to people. And it's just, how do you find, those people that you can communicate with? And, you know, I feel like I had one or two donors that probably should charge me by the hour for the counseling they gave me, because it just, you're talking through a million different scenarios. And you're right. A lot of people have their own opinions, their own expectations of what that process should yield. And you're in it, what the outcome is, most probable or most likely or most achievable. And you're trying to manage that. And sometimes you get some outside influences that can derail that expectation. But it's by and large, we're very fortunate here. And I think one of the things that matters most, and I'll say this, that really helped me here, is the alignment that we have with the institution. Again, our board and our administration are completely supportive of the mission that we're trying to achieve in athletics. And that's it's easy to say, but it's not always the case. And genuinely, they expect athletics to be one of the guiding lights for our institution. And Renew, our president, she had been pushing on several primary things, which was, R1 research status, Phi Beta Kappa, hopefully in near term in our future, like chasing P5 for us, AAU status academically. But the way all those things fit together to help raise the stature of the university, again, athletics is a very visible component of that. We all know that, but how that is correlated and helped us academically, this is my own theory, but it's interesting. And I don't know if you're familiar with what's happening in the state of Texas with the PUF fund. Are you familiar with that, Gene, the Permanent University Fund?
No, explain that to us, please.
So in the state of Texas, there's what's called the Permanent University Fund, and principally it was set up in the early 1900s, and it takes huge swaths of West Texas oil money and funds the Permanent University Fund in the state of Texas. Well, that money is earmarked for two institutions or two systems. That's Texas and Texas A&M. I want to say Texas loosely, and don't quote me on this, but closely, it gets about $800 million a year, and A&M gets about $400 million a year. But there aren't any other state institutions in the state of Texas that are able to access those funds. So it's interesting what happened when Texas OU announced. We all remember the Big 12, Commissioner Bowlesby, and a lot of the current members of the Big 12 were in front of the Senate hearing in the state of Texas, talking about conference realignment, the impact of Texas and OU leaving, and how that was going to affect the remaining state institutions. If you look at the state of California, has 10 AAU institutions. The state of Texas has 3, Texas, Texas A&M, and Rice. And so as they were talking to the institutions, and this is my own interpretation, I don't work for these other institutions, this Chris Pezman, University of Houston. But what they were talking about is, okay, what's the ability of, the remaining schools to go somewhere else or bring somebody else in? Well, you look at the Pac-12, those are different institutions than some of the remaining institutions in the Big 12. And it's not to cast aspersions on anybody. It's just the mindset is different. The Pac-12 is a very academically focused conference. I mean, high-end academic institutions. Same thing in the Big 12, but those are just different perception. Again, Tech, Houston are AAU institutions, so they don't necessarily at that point weren't necessarily considered, in my opinion, by the Pac-12 because they didn't have the same academic profile or personality. The outcome of all this is now the state is sitting here and saying, hey, the byproduct is going to be is now they're talking about creating another possible PUF fund that could benefit Texas Tech and University of Houston and the next set of emerging universities. And again, the genesis, and this is, again, my opinion, is that conversation started with conference alignment and the need then to make sure our institutions look like those other institutions so they had the adaptability to move if that need arose. And so we're sitting here today, and Renew is in Austin, championing a $1 billion PUF fund for the University of Houston. And by all indications, it's in a very healthy position that it could get funded here in this legislative cycle in the state. And that is the power of what happens and the visibility of what athletics can generate. And maybe I'm overstating it, and it's an athletic director thinking that we have sway in so many ways, but it's not hard, in my opinion, to draw the correlation between that conversation and then what is occurring right now in Austin and the genesis of what could be a very sizable moment or financially for some other institutions in the state of Texas.
No, I think that's great. Thank you for explaining that to us.
I hope I did it right. It's complicated.
Yeah, I certainly didn't know that. I know a lot of other people didn't know that. You know, Chris, you mentioned earlier that preparation for movement to the Big 12 or to the Pac 12 conference started 10 years ago. And I think that's true with Central Florida. I think it's true with BYU. It's certainly true with Houston and Cincinnati. I mean, Cincinnati has done a terrific job with facilities. As you're looking at things, how do you prioritize? As you've said before, you've got a list of things that you have to get ready for in going to the Big 12. How do you discipline yourself to prioritize things at the top and get those done first?
Yeah, we created an operating template, for lack of a better term, a discipline sheet of, okay, here are the things that we know we have to attack to give ourselves a chance to get through this transition. And again, it for us, it started with the rev gen opportunities. We've got to continue to enhance and build out our revenue generation units. We've been, by and large, I don't want to say, and this is, we've got some great people that work in there, but our bench is really short. We have to continue to add talent into those units. Our revenue generating programs, obviously, everybody knows you always have to invest in football and basketball because of the returns on them, but even more so through this process for us, because I would say the 4 new members coming in, as you're trying to catch up to everybody else from a budget standpoint, you have to continue to ensure that those 2 revenue producing units are operating as efficiently as they can. And it's interesting, Gene, when I got here, our operating budget was, call it $53 million. We had some stuff that was off the books that we put back on because we wanted to reflect that our budget was closer to a P5 level than it was to a G5 level. So we loaded everything into, and it got us to about $70 million. Well, what we did when I first got here is we took the bottom half of the Big 12 and the bottom half of the Pac 12, and that operating budget was about $83.5 million. And this was a few years ago. We knew naturally over the course of time that was going to increase. We're looking at in the next 3 years, we're going to go from about $78 million to $100 million. And in year 5 of the Big 12 will be about between $112 to $115 million. And that's in expenses. And I got to make sure. Yeah. And so I've got to sit here and make sure that, okay, how are we going to fund this? Because we've been heavily subsidized by the university, and we have to walk down that subsidy in a very meaningful way to be able to be financially healthy and stand on our own 2 feet. We'll knock our subsidy down in the first year of the Big 12 by about 30%, and we'll have it by year 3 easily is our projection. So we're gonna get ourselves into a position where we're much more healthy, and I can look at faculty across campus in the eye and not feel as guilty as I do every day because of the subsidies that we get. But that's what to me is so exciting, because then that gives us a lot more freedom to operate and to aggressively build up many of the sports programs that I know that we want to continue to be successful in. And that's we all love winners, and we want to be winning in every sport. And we got a lot of work to do to give ourselves a chance to do that, especially with the level of competition we're going to be facing.
Let's talk a minute about the city of Houston. I know when Howard Schnellenberger went to Miami, he put a line on Dade County down there, and he said, "We're gonna keep everybody home. That's our goal." You have some great football, high school football and basketball in the city of Houston. Is one of your goals to keep as many as those men and women uh, in town at the University of Houston? Because there's a lot of talent there.
Absolutely. It's interesting. Kelvin's done an exceptional job of doing that. He's signed, I think, 4 of the last 5 players of the year out of the city of Houston. And you can see the success that we have keeping those kids at home, not just in a conference or a local level, but at a national level. The talent exists here. And that's one of the things I really enjoy about being back in Texas and in the city of Houston. College sports, high school sports, it's cultural here. It's something that is ingrained. Friday night, you're going to a high school game. That's what matters. And so as that, then the talent level is there for us to be able to, keep our kids home in every sport and compete at the national level, at the highest level. One of the things that I has been really an opportunity for us is the transfer portal. If a kid, naturally, some kids just want to leave because they want to get away from home, but the amount of kids that we don't ever sever a relationship with a kid. Hey, you don't want to come here. We understand you want to go somewhere and try something else. Well, our coaches have been pretty thoughtful about it, how they approach that process. If a kid says, hey, I'm going to go to XYZ university in this state, they don't burn a bridge with them. They keep them a positive relationship, because more often, those kids have bounced back. And, Dana particularly, I think about half our class has been transfers of kids that have been around the city or in the state that have come back to us. And the talent acquisition that we've been able to get through that to raise the bar of our programs from a talent standpoint has been very significant. I think Kelvin, the way he's operating and the success they've had recruiting, they're getting out of necessarily having to have transfers. Maybe they're plugging in a spot or here or there, but the high level high school talent they've been able to attract. Again, they focus on the kids from Houston, and then they rifle shot national kids. That has worked for us, and it's something that we will continue to lean into, keeping our kids home and then trying to bring them back home, because there's so much talent here. And these kids, by and large, one kid brings 10 parents or family members to a game. That's what you build off of. And going back also to just moving football back on campus. And I know it's not a direct correlation to the question you asked, but we weren't getting a lot of kids when I played in the Astrodome. Students weren't going. It just wasn't a thing. Now, 5,000 kids are coming to every football game. Every one of our student tickets are claimed. I mean, that's part of one of the fun parts we get to work through, is how do we button up our student claim process to make sure that we are getting the right people into the building and not getting resold. These are first world problems that I'll take all day long.
But, that's right.
Yeah. But we get, we're building our alumni base, and by and large, we're a much younger institution. Our demographic is, we're 27 to 35 as far as the bulk of our graduates. And so what we're leaning into is not necessarily the next 5 years, but the next 15 to 20 years, because as our alumni are growing into, being a student, coming to games, buying a single game, transitioning them into a season ticket holder, then transitioning them into a donor. That's, we've got a little bit longer eye on it. We're looking at 10, 12, 15 years, because that's where our growth chart shows. But, the incremental growth that we're seeing year over year, because of people that are accustomed now to coming to games and it matters to them, is what we're seeing literally right now with the numbers that we've seen play out over the last 10 days.
The other thing that drives students is you're playing you're playing old rivals. You're playing Baylor, you're playing Texas, you're playing Texas Tech. I'm sure that a lot of your students' friends went to all those different schools. And so now there's some real pride in beating some of those other Texas teams that you had great rivalries with.
Oh, yeah. I mean, look, the first time we play Texas, Baylor, TCU, we haven't played TCU since 2007, I want to say. I mean, these are games that our fans have been yearning for, and never were able to make it work either through regular season games or bowl games. And frankly, I get it. There was some animosity there with the way things broke down with the Southwest Conference. And we've got a lot of scars here that we're looking forward to working ourselves out of as we transition to this new phase of competition for us and renewing these old rivalries.
That's great. We are out of time on this week's podcast. I'm your host, Gene DeFilippo. I want to thank our guest, Chris Pezman, for being with us. And I want to thank all of you out there. Thanks for your time this time, and we'll see you next time.